Hello everyone, good afternoon, my name is Billy Goodall. Today I'm going to talk about lifelong learning and self-directed learning. Before I made my title, I did some research and I really didn't know what to make the title. But after learning a little bit about lifelong learning and self-directed learning, I realized that this is actually a skill and that everyone really doesn't have this skill. So I'm going to get into it, how it actually is a skill for people. So going over the overview of what I'm really going to talk about in this presentation, I'm going to talk about lifelong learning and self-directed learning, and I'm going to talk about the definition of both, reasons why you should do this, some tips and tricks on both of these, and then I'm going to give a personal example in the end of this. Before getting into my presentation though, I put this quote up. It's a famous quote dealing with lifelong learning. It's by Henry Ford. It says, "Anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. The greatest thing in life is to keep your mind young." When I first thought of this, it kind of related to my parents. They're both roughly in their 60s. My mom, I would say, is more of a lifelong learner than my dad. He kind of hates technology, really doesn't want anything to do with it. And my mom's kind of the other way. She kind of, she doesn't know a lot about technology, but she's very interested in learning it. So if I would have to say this quote, it kind of relates to my mom or my dad. So getting into my presentation, the definition, I actually got this right off the dictionary. For lifelong learning, the definition is the provision or use of both formal and informal learning opportunities throughout people's lives in order to foster the continuous development and improvement of the knowledge and skills needed for employment and personal fulfillment. I felt like this was pretty straightforward. Obviously, lifelong learning is, continuously learning throughout your life. But then one part that I wasn't really sure on was the formal and informal learning. So what I found was formal learning is kind of basically what we go through as a young toddler. We're going to go to preschool, we're going to go to kindergarten, then we're going to go to middle school, high school, and then we could go on to college. And this formal learning is kind of like being in a classroom and having a professor or a teacher teach you. And informal learning is, you're not going to be in, a formal setting like a classroom. It's almost going to be, maybe you're just out one day and you learned something new, whether it could be really anything. Just daily activities, you can learn new things every single day. So that's kind of the definition for lifelong learning that I wanted to use, and kind of just breaking it down. So getting into the reasons, why would you want to be a lifelong learner? The first reason I put was personal development. And this could be really anything, as far as it could be you want to learn a sport, or you want to learn how to play the piano, or anything like those lines. It doesn't have to be for your specific major or your occupation. And also just being a good person, learning different ethics in the world. Just personally developing yourself to what you want to be in your lifetime. The other reason I thought would be professional development. Now this deals with your occupation or your education. As far as, I think about my father. He was out of the contracting business for a couple of years, and he came back and he realized that, he was behind, and actually the building codes are changing every single day. So to be a lifelong learner for your profession, you got to be learning every day to stay up with all the new news, new building codes, as far as that. And then my last reason why you would want to be a lifelong learner is to help others. There's many people out there that do research on an everyday basis, not just for themselves, but rather they want to develop something to help others in the future, and they're looking out for the future of this world. Those are some of my reasons why you would want to be a lifelong learner. Getting into some of the tips and tricks to be a good lifelong learner, the first big one I think is having the motivation. If you don't have the motivation or the drive to learn what you specifically want to learn, then you're probably either learning the wrong thing or lifelong learning is not for you, and you should maybe think of doing something else, which couldn't hurt your occupation. Another tip and trick would be distractions. This is a big one in our day and age. With all the technology and cell phones and computers, it's important to put this stuff away while you're trying to apply lifelong learning. So you can be fully focused on what your task is, on what you're trying to learn. Another one is increments. Rather than cramming everything in for one day in the week, maybe break it up into smaller sections. It was found that you actually learn better in smaller increments rather than cramming something in over a whole day. The next one was notes. This is kind of applying your learning. Rather than just sitting there and gaining knowledge and hoping you remember stuff, take notes, or even as far as us, for engineers, we're going to learn a concept and then we're going to have to apply that doing equations or even out in the field. Another one would be practice. So for our field, we have to learn the concept and then we have to constantly keep doing this over and over again. So as you keep practicing, you're obviously going to be better at that certain thing that you're trying to do. And once again, practice and repetitiveness, they kind of go hand in hand. But once you learn something, don't just make that the last time you learn it. Even teach someone it. Teaching someone could help you, if you forgot about one little detail of something, teaching someone or even doing it on a repetitive basis can help you be a expert in that particular thing. So getting into self-directed learning, I pulled this definition. It was written by Dickinson, and it says, in which individuals take the initiative with or without the help of others in diagnosing their learning needs, formulating learning goals, identifying human and material resources for learning, choosing and implementing appropriate learning strategies, and evaluating learning outcomes. So there was the definition I thought was most appropriate for us, and I'll kind of break it down from my personal experience in the slide to come. Some reasons to why you should take on self-directed learning. So it said in the definition that you could be helped or not helped. So if you're learning on your own, you can control your own pace. I know everyone learns at a different pace. So by learning by yourself, from what you maybe were taught earlier, and you go home and you apply it, you can control your own pace on how you want to take that information. Hands-on, for self-directed learning, like the same thing. Everyone learns a different way. So maybe as far as like a math class goes, maybe you just need to look at it, but maybe the other guy needs to go to the whiteboard and write it down. So this is one other way, or one reason why. Another one is motivation. If you don't have motivation, then you're not going to be a good self-directed learner. This is a huge reason why you should want to do self-directed learning, so you can continually learn. And it helps eliminate redundancy. So as far as if two people were hired for a certain workstation, and one person was ahead of the other, and they both had to go learn something, if they both applied self-directed learning, the one person could just skip over the stuff that they knew and go into the new stuff that they didn't know, and the other guy could take his time and learn from the beginning. So it kind of eliminates the redundancy when you have people self-directly learning, and it helps themselves rather than worrying about what other people know. Some tricks and tips. You got to have an initiative. This is the first step. You got to know what you want to learn. Set some goals. Maybe if you reach the end of the chapter, make yourself some goals to, give you the initiative to want to self-direct learn on an everyday basis. Again, increments. Don't try to cram everything in at one time. The 5-hour rule. This was actually invented by Benjamin Franklin. He actually dropped out of school when he was 10, and he's one of our most famous inventors and philosophers. But because he dropped out of school, he set aside an hour every single day of the week where he would personally learn by reading or doing hands-on stuff. So that's kind of how he applied it. He made himself do at least 5 hours a week, so he's not cramming. Actively learning, which I said this is like taking notes or computing problems. And then lastly, again, is just having the motivation to want to do this. If you don't have motivation, you're probably not learning what you should be learning. You should probably look into something else, what you want to do with your life. So finally, do my little personal example of how I think I was self-directed learning. When I first got here, as all you know, we had to take that math test. I scored really low. I didn't know if I should be an engineer, but I took the initiative to give it a try. I talked, and with or without the help, I got help from my professors, and I also didn't have help when I was out of the classroom. I had to go do it myself at home on my own time. Diagnosing their learning needs, I knew that I was strong in other classes compared to math. I knew I was really far behind in math. So I diagnosed knowing that I'm probably gonna have to spend twice as amount of time on this math class as I am in this other class. My learning goals, my goals was just to pass.
Can you talk about, can you explain a little bit more about diagnosing the learning need?
I believe that's more or less knowing your weakness or your strength.
So basically you think you were weak on math,
Right.
and then you need to learn more on that.
I need to spend more time on that than something else that I probably know a little bit more about.
I see, okay.
Learning goals, I wanted to be an engineer, but to be an engineer I had to get through these math classes. So my goal was I wanted to be an engineer, but I had the roadblock of these math classes. The next part of this definition, identifying human and material resource for learning. Basically what this came down to was I had the professors for help, I had tutoring for help, and then we had our online homework. And that was actually really big because you could tell how good you were doing on an everyday basis with the homework. Implementing appropriate learning strategies, like I said, that had to do with the online homework, going to tutoring, and going to your professors. And then the last part of that self-directed learning was evaluating learning outcomes. And this just came with your final grade in the class. That's how basically I evaluated myself on how I was doing. As the progress went on, I knew my grade, so I know how I was doing, if I need to put more time in or not. And that's kind of how I actually learned how to self-direct learn. I feel like I didn't really know it coming to the University of Mount Union, but after going through education here, I feel like I have been able to apply the resource of self-directed learning. And here's my references. Are there any questions?
Okay, can you go back one slide?